still under siege, or has Mariupol fallen? Moscow says 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers have surrendered, but Kiev claims the city remains under its control. Who's to be believed? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Mariupol. Well, after 6 weeks under Russian siege, Mariupol has been brought to its knees. Taking control of the strategic port city in southeastern Ukraine would be a massive win for Russia. And Moscow has now claimed victory after 1,000 Ukrainian forces reportedly surrendered.
In the city of Mariupol, near the Ilyich Iron and Steel Works, as a result of successful offensives by Russian armed forces and Donetsk People's Republic militia units, 1,026 Ukrainian soldiers of the 36th Marine Brigade voluntarily laid down their arms and surrendered.
Shortly after that announcement, Russian state TV released this footage showing Marines laying down their arms. The pictures have not been verified, and Kiev says the fight for Mariupol is still on. The port city has been the battleground for some of the conflict's fiercest fighting. So why is capturing Mariupol such a strategic goal? Well, the city was once home to about 400,000 Ukrainians, the vast majority of whom have fled since Russia attacked. If Mariupol falls to Russian forces, taking over its port and factories would be a massive win for Moscow. It would also complete a land corridor connecting Crimea, which Moscow annexed in 2014, to areas in the Donbass controlled by Russian-backed separatists and onto Russia itself. What's more, Russia would gain control of more than 80% of Ukraine's coastline, crippling trade and the already fragile Ukrainian economy. Well, the 6-week siege has destroyed about 90% of Mariupol's infrastructure. Schools, hospitals, and homes have been reduced to rubble. But according to the city's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, it is the civilians who've suffered most.
According to our estimations, the number of casualties has reached approximately 21,000 civilians in peaceful Mariupol. We know, and there is evidence, that bodies disappear from the streets. We know that there are so-called concentration places where they hide bodies, and they then plan to destroy the evidence of tortures they committed in the city of Mariupol. We call it genocide. We call it war crime.
But regardless of the accusations against Russia, its military continues to push forward. So, will Mariupol fall, and where would that leave this ongoing conflict? To discuss that and more, I'm joined now by Ivan Katchanovski, a political studies professor at the University of Ottawa. Peter Zalmayev is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, a nonprofit organization aiming to reinforce democratic institutions in post-Soviet countries. And from Moscow, we have Sergey Markov, a former member of the Russian parliament. Thanks all so much for being with us. Ivan, I'll start with you. If Mariupol has not been taken already by Russian forces, will it be, or do you think Ukraine can still turn this around?
I think now Mariupol is a major battlefield between Russia and Ukraine. And according to the latest information, after surrender of many Ukrainian troops in Mariupol, so Russia making significant advances along with separatist forces. So it's expected that Russia and separatists in Donbass would be able to capture Mariupol completely in the immediate future or in the near future. But again, war is unpredictable. But I think this is most likely scenario, what would happen.
Okay. Sergey Markov, where do you stand? I mean, I imagine you believe what we are hearing from Russian media. We say the reports have not been verified independently, but you can tell us you think they're true.
Mariupol didn't taken by Russian army and Donbass army. Now Mariupol port have been taken, and also it's very important. Most of the districts where civilians lived also already liberated. It's helped Russian army because during previous 1 month the fighting have been very much difficult because Ukrainian forces, specifically fascist platoon Azov, very intensively used the tactic of human shield, taking civilians in Mariupol as hostages and using them in fighting against Russian army. I've been in Mariupol many times. I know that 90% of those people, they dream to be part of Russia. They not just want to be part of Russia. They dream to be part of the Russia. They pray to be part of the Russia. And it's one of the reasons why fascists from Azov use them as a humanitarian shield. Now, these fascists blocked in the Azovstal plant territory, and it's make another attack more easy.
Okay, let me speak to, right, Peter Zalmayev. Well, the Russians say not only has Mariupol been taken, but people are very happy about it.
Well, once again, this is our second time in a row that I'm going head-to-head with Mr. Markov, who is continuing to exist in some sort of alternate reality, which exists for him and maybe a few million of his compatriots. Everyone else around outside of Russia is seeing things as they are. If there were any, and I will grant you that, before February 24th, of this year, there were still some Ukrainians, a sizable number even, I would say, especially in the east of the country, who may have been amenable to the idea of a Donbass that would be a protectorate of Russia, or maybe even becoming part of Russia anymore. Like I said before, Vladimir Putin has now killed the last remaining Russian in Ukraine, metaphorically speaking. We have seen this time and again. And once again, the shelling of Ukraine, the most brutal tactics that Putin has used in Ukraine has been precisely against the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, the Russian-speaking Kharkiv, the Russian-speaking Mariupol. And that has been the cruel irony of this campaign. Now, Mariupol may fall pretty soon. I'm not, I would probably be of that opinion. But at the same time, Mariupol has served a heroic role in the defense of Ukraine. It has been pulling towards it and keeping busy all these Russian troops that could be fighting elsewhere. So you could credit Mariupol with saving Kiev.
Understood. But the bottom line is you don't think the city has necessarily been taken just yet, but it probably will be.
It hasn't been taken. It hasn't been taken yet, not from what I understand, no.
Okay, and you're saying this from inside the country, so... but it's interesting because many Ukrainians are saying they are very proud of the battle for Mariupol because many thought Putin would be able to at least take that city relatively quickly, within even the first few days of the attack. Instead, 42 days later, they are still fighting. Still, though, a loss will be a loss. So where will that leave eastern Ukraine?
Well, this allows Vladimir Putin to claim this corridor, the very, very narrow corridor linking the peninsula of Crimea with the occupied part of the Donbass. This is going to be very important for the Russians in light of the upcoming date of May 9th, which is the day of Soviet victory over the Nazi Germany. This is the day when a parade takes place on the Red Square in Moscow. This is a very important day for Vladimir Putin. He's going to have to show something to his subjects, and the military is going all out to try to cement this as and present it as a victory. But let me just tell you this: to keep this under control, this narrow strip of land for the foreseeable future is going to be very hard, and is going to be bleeding all kinds of blood and treasure from the Russian Federation, just keeping these areas in southern Ukraine and eastern Ukraine under Russian control.
Peter, are you sure of that? Because that's what Georgia had effectively warned about back in 2008, that, okay, Russia could storm in, take this territory, claim 20% of what used to be Georgia, but the Georgians weren't going to stop fighting, yet they have. Russia got what it wanted there, but you don't see the same scenario in Ukraine.
Andrea, I mean, we're comparing, I mean, Georgia is a country of less than 5-6 billion people, and Ukraine is a country of 44. I mean, it's 10 times as big. And obviously the armaments that Ukraine has been receiving right now. I mean, Russia does not have the kind of precision weaponry that Ukraine has received. So there's just really no comparison there.
Okay, Sergey, are Russians ready for that prospect, that they may be able to claim victory over Mariupol in the next day or so? They may be able to celebrate with Putin on May 9th, on Russia's Victory Day, but that this will continue and Russian troops will have to keep fighting very hard to maintain whatever territorial gains they make and that corridor, that land corridor that they have been trying to build.
Russia has a lot of land. So Russia interesting not about land. Russia interesting about the people, about those dozens of millions of people. 80% of them speak Russian language. And Russian language, if you know, prohibited in all public spheres in Ukraine. And of course, as I understand, it's impossible to believe that people can democratically support the prohibition of native language of the overwhelming majority of the country. It's clear signal of the undemocratic characteristic of Kiev repressive regime.
Okay.
And we're interested, first of all, to liberate those people. These people live not only in Mariupol. These people live in Kharkov, in Odessa, in Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Nikolaev, and other cities. They want to be in Russia. Now they cannot express their opinion because they are under the pressure of the tremendous terroristic regime in Kiev. But when they're free, they will fully support this rejoining with Russia.
Okay, Sergey, let me just ask you then, if the battle for Mariupol is finished, Russia says it is victorious, what happens next? You mentioned the Russians in Odessa, for example. Will Russia keep pushing, or will you accept this victory for what it is and leave it alone?
Absolutely. This is very not victory, because a lot of people, civilians, have been killed because of fighting. It's our people. And of course, it's absolutely not enough. Russia absolutely will not stop. Russia will crush the main group of Ukrainian army and will continue to liberate Ukraine. Russia will come, nevertheless, only to those territories where population, where people, ordinary people, wants to see Russian soldiers and Russian army. We know that on the western part of Ukraine, they doesn't like Russia. Probably our tragedy for us that Kiev, ancient Russian city, a capital. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Kiev doesn't like Russia. That's why I think Russian army will not come to the Kiev, but will take control over those cities where most of the pro-Russian people live.
Okay, so, I mean, Peter, I'm going to go back to Ivan, but just to say, I mean, that must be a frightening prospect for Ukrainians like yourself to hear that Russia doesn't really intend to stop because it believes it is protecting Russian people's interests in the lands that it will go to battle for, including even Odessa in the future. Well, but go ahead, quickly,
Andrea,
Peter.
Very quickly to reflect, we've touched on this before with Mr. Markov. You know, this is like, once again, I am in Ukraine and I see it better. How this is a very ridiculous statement to make, that Russian is prohibited and it's banned. Everywhere you go in Ukraine, even in Western Ukraine, people tolerate Russian language. Our president is largely a Russian-speaking Jew, if you talk about Nazis, you know. And finally, what we're fighting against is not some kind of, obviously, liberation of the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, but really a genocidal campaign of the Russian Federation. It's been made clear in Russian media that Russia is currently trying to de-Ukrainianize Ukraine. It cannot live with the idea of a free Ukraine. So what Ukraine is doing is fighting for its own survival.
Okay. Let me come back to Ivan, because I want to return to what we're talking about now in Mariupol. Ivan, you know, if morale had been low among Russian troops, which many analysts had mentioned, to say the least, some had said it was at rock bottom, and there were moments when they said that the Russian military couldn't actually carry out much of its plan because morale was so hit. So how much would taking Mariupol, being able to celebrate that sort of victory, building this corridor, how much would that alone boost Russian troops?
I think I cannot comment on the morale of Russian military because I'm not expert, and I would check with a grain of salt reports in the media and by politicians and government officials, because there is a kind of information of going on. But according to my research, I can comment briefly on a previous issue which was mentioned. According to surveys which I commissioned in Ukraine, even after 2014 violent overthrow of Ukrainian government, in eastern Ukraine, with the exception of Donbass, there was very limited support for joining Russia by the region. Even so, they generally Russian-speaking, and the same applies to southern Ukraine, including Kherson region, which is now taken over by Russia, and the same applies to Odessa, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, with the exception of Donbass. Only in Donbass and Crimea there was significant support for joining Russia before this war started. And I think the goal of Russia is to incorporate Donbass, entire Donbass, including regions or part of Donbass which is currently controlled by the Ukrainian government, into separatist republics, which were just recently recognized by Russia in the borders of all Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And I think this explains why Russia wants to advance in Mariupol. And after Russian victory in Mariupol, they would obviously use this in order to advance to other regions of or other parts of Donbass region, like Slovyansk and Kramatorsk and Lysychansk in the northern part, and trying to encircle Ukrainian forces using similar tactic. But in addition to this, I think they also would use this as a leverage in talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, in Turkey. And Zelensky admitted publicly that this would be a difficult position for Ukraine after fall of Mariupol to, again, in terms of negotiations with Russia. I think this would be also a major development in this war between Russia and Ukraine. But I don't think that there would be any public support for joining Russia now in other parts of Ukraine, even when we're not talking about Western Ukraine.
But the outlook, at least in your opinion, seems to be similar to what Sergey was saying for the strategy going forward, that the aggression will actually continue. But Sergey, if you can talk a bit about, the reports that Russia said weren't true, but were very prevalent in the media about the morale of Russian troops being so low, they weren't being supplied, they didn't want to go on fighting. And now we're hearing that this victory, if it does indeed happen, taking Mariupol will significantly boost the Russian military's will to keep fighting. Is that what you foresee?
What we can read in Western media about Russian army, it's exactly what German Nazis media published about Red Army and about American Army and British Army, who also come to the Germany and to the Europe to liberate Germany from Nazi regime. It's same demonization, same style of Goebbels, same lie of Goebbels style. So the most important is another thing. It's not just propaganda which we see. But look, I told you, Kramatorsk, it was not Russian rocket. It was Ukrainian rocket which killed civilian on the railroad station. And what had happened? Now even BBC had to publish this because occasionally the number of this rocket appeared to be in the media. It became absolutely clear that it's Ukrainian army. Occasionally, they understood that I was right. Same, I'm right about Bucha. Civilians in Bucha had been killed by Ukrainian fascists who killed them because they taken humanitarian aid from hands of Russian soldiers, which Zelensky prohibited them to do. Same will be with all another accusation of Russian army in military crime. In few days, or in few months, or in few years, all of these, claims of Russian army accusation will be shown very well as exactly fake and propaganda.
Okay,
but
Sergey.
The fact that Ukrainian army used the civilians as human shield, it's approved every day, and we will have more and more fact about this.
Okay, Sergey. I mean, Peter, we know, like you said, you have discussed this at length on our program before with Sergey Markov, and they're just polar opposite narratives that we hear. We're not going to sort that out now. I want to go back to Mariupol. I mean, we said just a minute ago that if Mariupol does fall, Ukraine will have lost about 80% of its coastal access. Where does that leave Ukraine? What does it lose economically and strategically?
Well, obviously, the war is costing Ukraine a pretty penny, to say the least. So far, Ukraine has suffered a damage in the area of over $500 billion, according to some estimates, and obviously that number is rising. The economists are currently already discussing a Marshall Plan for Ukraine's reconstruction. But you know what? I have news for our viewers. The bulk of the reconstruction of Ukraine will be funded by the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin has already, in fact, paid in advance a significant part of for his campaign and for Ukraine's reconstruction, because if you remember, upwards of $300 billion in Russia's sovereign wealth fund have been frozen in Western banks. Billions of dollars belonging to Russian oligarchs have been frozen. And right now, various schemes are being considered for how to claw back that money so that it eventually pays for Ukraine's reconstruction.
Okay, interesting. If we can move on, Ivan, I want to come back to you about this. I'm hoping you can comment on this, because Russia does at least acknowledge that its Black Sea missile cruiser has been seriously damaged. They said the crew has indeed been evacuated. Ukraine says it hit the ship. Russia, of course, says there was actually a fire on board. It had nothing to do with Ukrainian missiles. Which scenario do you think is actually more likely to be true? And how big of a loss, could that ship in itself really be to Russia's military?
I think I saw just a video before this interview, which was released by Ukrainian politicians and Ukrainian military, which shows impact an explosion on this flagship of a Black Sea fleet of Russia. And this is, I think, would be consistent with a missile strike by Ukrainian forces and not with explosion, as the Russian government would claim. But according to the latest reports, again, which might be updated, this ship was did not sink, so it still can be used by Russia. But I think this is more a political blow to Russian military and to Russian war efforts, because Russia was able to destroy or capture most of Ukrainian fleet, and it still has military advantage over Ukraine. I think I'm quite pessimistic about future of Ukraine, no matter what would happen. And if war would continue, Ukraine might lose even more territories. I think this would be much more significant damage to Ukraine, and I think the best solution to deal with this crisis and with this war, which is illegal, again, under international law, is to stop war crimes and other violations of human rights and civil casualties, is to reach a peaceful peaceful solution of this conflict. And I think there was such possibility in the last few weeks during negotiations in Istanbul, but now the prospects become much more bleak in this regard. But in any way, this would be like a possible solution to end this war.
Okay. Sergey, we just have a few minutes left. I have to raise this with you because, as a result of this invasion, we spoke about it before, it's looking more and more likely that traditionally neutral neighbors, Sweden and Finland, will indeed make that formal bid to join NATO now. Last time I asked you, you laughed and you just said Russia doesn't care what they do. But just today, the Kremlin issued a warning saying if they join, Russia will have to boost its own defenses, and that there could be no more talk of a nuclear-free Baltic, and that Russia will actually take measures to restore balance. So it sounds indeed like they do care. They do care a lot, and that the Kremlin is taking it so seriously that it's actually considering boosting its nuclear arsenal in the region.
I can say again, Russia not so much care. It will be technical change, and Dmitry Medvedev talked exactly about this. If nuclear weapons of United States and Great Britain will stay on the territory of Sweden and Finland, of course, Russia will have to react and to have, also nuclear rocket missiles target on the territory of Sweden and Finland. It's a normal technical reaction, but army of Finland and even Sweden, not so much, not so important.
Okay.
This territory also not so important. So, and also it was secret treaty, semi-secret treaty, scheduled treaty between NATO and Sweden. If real military conflicts, Sweden army will join NATO army in military operation.
Okay.
So it does not matter too much. It probably
Sergey,
will be perseverance of this.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt it there. We are unfortunately completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank Sergey Markov, Peter Zalmayev, and Ivan Katchanovski so much for joining us, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.